Vamos começar então, pessoal? Bom dia a todos.
Well, good morning, all of you. I am Gisela Foracini, International Assistant for the National Agency of Waters, and I would like to greet and welcome all of you here today for the opening of our series of international webinars for 2021 for the National Agency of Waters and Basic Sanitation. In 2020, I believe lots of you have already participated in a series of webinars that we organized, sponsored by SAS and Sinchi, where we were debating on 4 important topics, which were the management of the water scarcity, the shortage of water, the water used in agriculture, management of water resources, and the mechanisms to facilitate the implementation of legal instruments in the area of water resources. These webinars last year were developed in the scope of 2 major projects of ANA. ANA, ABCCPLP, in the monitoring and support of the Portuguese-speaking countries and the water management, and the professional mastering project in regulation of water resources, our ProfÁgua. This current proposal for the second cycle of international webinars came to encounter the stories of the Latin American countries and European countries besides Brazil, striving for their strategies in the implementation of the integrated management of water resources, and in the contribution to SDG 6. And talking about SDG 6, I'd like to inform and take this advantage to inform that, or to share and introduce the new project from ANA. ANA celebrated an agreement with the University of the United Nations and the Institute of Water and Environment, UNO, for the implementation of the tools for the decision-making system support in relation to the policies for SDG 6. And this system is called SSP SDG 6. So the system, or this tool, focuses on generating evidences for the definition of public policies for the processes of decision-making involving all stakeholders, considering the current situation of the analyzed situation and the involved institutions, besides the information that would support us in the monitoring of those SDG 6 targets. This is part of a greater project which already concentrates 34 countries, and this would be the 3rd phase of this project, Water in the World We Want, involving the consortium between the University of the United Nations, LASD, United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, and the Environment Ministry of Korea, Pakistan, and Tunisia. So in this moment, ANA is now concentrating on almost 30 institutions in this project for the implementation of this tool for the Brazilian case. We hired also a specialized consultancy for helping us, and until the beginning of June, we are going to have then this exercise being done for the Brazilian case. So this would involve the application of some questionnaires and surveys related to the 7 components that are state, financing or funding, capacity, governability, gender, resilience, and integrity. So this case study for our Brazilian reality would then be presented and also an international webinar by ANA in the 2nd semester. It's not part of this set of 3 webinars about integrated water management. So it's a huge pleasure to open this series, the new series of ANA. We have 3 webinars. We have here also Humberto, who is the superintendent of SAS, also a coordinator. And I should tell you all that last year we had a huge success with the webinars. We had an impact which was much greater than we could imagine with our webinars. So I would like to welcome all of you, and let's now expect the 2nd series in the 2nd semester, and also pass the words to Humberto now. Thank you.
Bom, só aproveitando aqui, não quero ser, não quero.
Okay, I want to be very brief. I don't want to be long here, but I would like to mention our huge satisfaction to be restarting this new cycle of international webinars in water resource management. Last year, as Gisela mentioned, we had our first cycle, and now we are, with our meeting today, we're starting our second cycle. And we're going to have 4 other meetings and involving 7 countries. So we are now working, and we're going to have the opportunity to count with the participation of experts from Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Chile. So this is extremely interesting. This exchange of experience is very interesting for the water resource management, and of course with a special focus mainly on what would be the strategies to achieve the targets of SDG 6. That's the main focus. And without any doubt, we have to register the strategic partnership that we have since 2015 with ProfÁgua. ProfÁgua is a program, a professional mastering program that Ana has been developing since 2015, a mastering of regulation and management. And on behalf of Professor Jefferson, I would like to register our deep thanks and acknowledgments for this partnership, to be involved with Germany as well in this model of participation. The pandemics brought lots of sad things, but also lots of, we miss a lot of people already, but it brings also a new experience that we are taking over, which would be the webinars and the online and remote meetings. I believe this is here to stay. We're having a lot of success with our webinars, and the countries, the Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa are also involved in this process. Last year was a very successful year with this experience, and we also had recently a meeting, a week seminar with OECD about the semi-arid, and also everything was remote, online, a huge success, and the tools and the mechanisms for simultaneous translation helped us so much during these events and webinars. So not to prolong much, I would like to congratulate all the participants, my friend Rosa Formiga, and I also would like to greet all other participants. And I also would like to invite you all for the next journey, the capacity building cycle that we're going to have next month. And we're going to have 3 other meetings in this webinar format. So congratulations to all the participants. Thank you so much to the speakers. And I also would like to thank our training team, the capacity building team, Renata and her team, always taking care of everything, and also our international assistance group through Gisela, who is a lover of those webinars. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a wonderful, productive day. Thank you so much, Humberto. Thank you very much, Gisela, for opening our second cycle of webinars, international webinars, now with 4 presentations. We have started today, next Thursday another one, the next Thursday the third, and then in July we're going to be having our other cycle. So it's a great pleasure to be ahead of this project. I thank Renata Maranhão for all the support, and also all of our international partners from the Institute of Technology, tropical and subtropical, from the University of Colombia, represented by Professor Lars. But our great contact is also Professor Alexandra, and I also would like to thank Professor from UERJ and the mastering professional mastering program in water resources, and also the other participants, students and the non-students from ProfÁgua. And without all of you, our project would not be valid. It is developed and designed for you and by you, so it's important for us to highlight this partnership of Ana has been extremely important. And without longing much, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Cristiano Boleto, coordinator of ProfÁgua. And a great colleague for a long time, and it's so good to be involved in this work with Germany and Brazil. Thank you all participants, steering committee, organizing committee, and I pass the word now to Professor Boleto to moderate our meeting.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome all of you to our second cycle of international webinars from ANA. Our event has simultaneous interpretation for Spanish and English. ANA has prepared a series of webinars adapted to this moment of the pandemic to allow the continuity of the exchange of experiences and the capacity building, even remotely. We'll try to bring updated information from different international contexts with great repercussion in world interest for the water resources. In order to bring a greater dynamism, the proposal is to make something like a talk show among several experts of waters and all of you who are our guests to enhance this talk show. The webinars were organized by ANA in the scope of Project ANA, ABC, CPLP, supporting the monitoring of water resources in the countries of Portuguese-speaking countries. And the professional mastering program, ProfÁgua. Today, our chat will be about integrated management for water resources. I am Professor Champoleta from the Institute of Water Resource Research, and I will be today's moderator, contextualizing the integrated management of water resources, which is a process that promotes the development and also the coordinated management of water, soil, and related resources. The main objective would be to foster the socioeconomic well-being without impacting the sustainability of the ecosystems. SDG 6, drinking water and sanitation, tries to ensure the availability and the sustainable use of water and sanitation for all member countries for the United Nations until 2030. SDG 6.1 establishes the deadlines until 2030, so then the countries can reach the universal access and equitable access of drinking safe water for everyone. Now, target 6.2 is the access of sanitation, hygiene, equitable for everyone. 6.3 for SDG 6 is to enhance the water quality through the reduction of pollution and fostering the reuse of the resource. And 6.4 forces to increase the efficiency in the water use in all sectors and reduce the number of people which suffer with water scarcity, water shortage. And 6.5, the countries should be implementing the integrated management of water resources via international cooperation in the case of international waters. And to close, 6.6 is to protect and restore the ecosystems related to water as rivers, aquifers, and in this way, we're going to judge appropriate to discuss these topics and mention and highlight in these webinars issues like strategies for SDG 6, focusing on Germany, and then Brazil. Our event will have the duration of an hour and a half. The format will be like a talk show with our guests, focusing on relevant topics. During an hour right afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A session with the participants that could be sent on the Q&A button or option in Zoom and also in the chat in written form. The questions can be sent during the presentations, and we will organize and separate these questions so we can pass them on to the speakers, and then they will be answering during the Q&A session after the presentation. So let's start. To compose our debate, we are going to have here representatives from Brazil and Germany bringing different perspectives about the topic. Dr. Lars Ribbe is a professor of integrated management of terrestrial and water resources and director of the Institute Tropic and Subtropic Resources for the University of Applied Sciences in the city of Cologne, Germany, as well as the head of projects for the Center of Natural Resources and Development. Has a doctorate in the area of computer science, and he works currently with evaluation, modeling, and management of water basins. He develops systems about knowledge system that helps the decision makers to deal with the predominant challenges related to water resources. He is the coordinator of the Master Program, Integrated Management of Water Resources, which is actively connected to programs, mastering programs around the world. Dr. Lars?
And now it's up to you.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning to Brazil. Good afternoon, actually, here from Germany. Thank you very much for the invitation, and a special thanks to Anna to organize this webinar, and especially to Gisela Foracchini. Thank you very much that I have a chance here to give a short presentation. I would like to ask, what is the time that you allocate for a presentation?
30 minutes.
Okay, I will try to make it shorter so we have a bit time to discuss as well. So I hope it will work. Just a second. Can you see my screen?
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. So once again, thank you very much for the invitation. And I will talk a bit about water management in Germany. And if we say Germany, we have to say European Union, because most of the laws that we follow, most of the policy frameworks we follow are nowadays coming from Brussels, not from Berlin. But I will also give, of course, a bit of insights into the German water management and the specific things that we have here at the national level. So thank you for the introduction, and especially thanks also to our colleagues from ProfÁgua. We are very happy to be part of this excellent network of universities in Brazil joining under this umbrella. Especially thanks to Jefferson and also Mauricio here. We enjoy very much working with you. And perhaps you see my affiliation here, you mentioned it as well. We are Faculty of Spatial Development and Infrastructure Systems, and the name of the institute. And I would like to highlight that we are engaging in a very active international networks. I think some of the network members will present later to talk about water management in their countries. And we have actually also something that could be part of another webinar, perhaps, how to connect to this international network in another form, especially through the many master courses that offer the program called Integrated Water Resource Management. So it's of course, there are many programs on water, engineering, perhaps also water management, but perhaps not so many with the actual title of Integrated Water Management. And we have here a network we call IWMNet, where universities in Costa Rica are connected, in Vietnam, in Jordan. We have many universities that are currently designing master programs, like in Sudan, like in Egypt or in Bangladesh, so that we hope to have a growing network of partners that offer a master program that is following the integrated approach to water management. So that is perhaps a little bit of, I would not say an advertisement, but rather an invitation to think about this connection to an international community here. I would like to start, or I divided it in two parts. One is the European part, and the second is the German part. And as you will notice, it is closely related one to another. And I know that the students in the ProfÁgua already have heard about some aspects of the Water Framework Directive. Since the audience here is quite larger than the students of ProfÁgua, I will refer again to some of the basic concepts of the Water Framework Directive. And I think that is quite interesting, I hope, to understand what is the situation in a setting where many countries work together. And many countries are exactly 27. The area that you see, of course, here UK unfortunately is not a member anymore. It's not green anymore, but you see still a high diversity of countries, larger countries, smaller countries. Altogether, it is, even though it is a population of 450 million people, the total size of the European Union is just half of that of Brazil. No? So it's a high population density, high diversity of countries, but in a rather limited space. And on the right, you see the river basins of Europe. This is the whole of Europe. And now those river basins that are crossing more than one boundary are highlighted in this reddish color. So you see, of course, UK, it's not member of EU, but still in a kind of national context is an island. So there is no international basin in the UK except in Northern Ireland. But the rest of Europe is basically characterized by international river courses. So that is a special feature that we have, and we should address the issue of transboundary water management. Now, the Water Framework Directive started in the year 2000, but that was the point when basically a long discussion ended on how to organize water management in the European Union. And you see, with the start of the European Union in the 1970s already, this is when the environmental law came up very significantly. A lot of directives were issued. You see here chemicals, bathing water, fish water, drinking water, wastewater, nitrate directive, and so on. So there were more than 20 directives at that time that somehow had a relationship to water. And this is, until now, I would say, still a characteristic of water management, that we are having approaches that are much more oriented in sectors or even in individual initiatives or silos, as we like to say. So that is, with the Water Framework Directive, there was an attempt to coordinate this kind of diversity and often also unclarity if it comes to the way we manage waters. What are the key elements of the Water Framework Directive? And principle number one is it is organized on the foundation of river basins, taking watersheds as a management unit. This is a principle followed in many countries in the world. In Brazil, I think it is also a very important basic principle. And nowadays, more and more countries adopt this kind of governance principle. So accordingly, then management districts are set up. For the districts, competent authorities were determined. That there should be one lead authority that is coordinating the process. And of course, there as an instrument, basin management plans need to be developed. And that follows an overall strategy of an economic analysis, which is embedded in a pressure state impact kind of logic. Sometimes it's also called DPSIR, so you can say driving forces, lead pressures, creating a certain status and having further impacts. And in this cycle, in this logical cycle, we allocate the program of measures, which is hopefully leading to an improved status over the long time. So that is the basic logic of the Water Framework Directive, and the integrated approach applies to summarizing all water bodies under this framework: surface water, groundwater, lakes, transitional coastal waters. Of course, combining not only water quantity, but also quality elements. And when we talk about the status of waters, if you look at the legislations that were enforced, also sometimes at the national level before the Water Framework Directive, sometimes you had emission orientation, sometimes you had ambient water quality orientation. So that is also something that is combined. We look at the quality in the water. So that is, if you go back to the SDG targets, something that is referred to in SDG target 6.3, but then also emission aspects like controlling the pollution coming from different sectors. So that is also a very important part of that approach. If we talk about status and quality of waters, We use biological, chemical, and quantitative elements. And there's a special reference to the complete phasing out of certain hazardous substances, which starts with not producing them anymore, but if they are in the environment, how to take them out of water, wastewater, etc. So that is, and here's an overview about the types of waters. Perhaps nothing to discuss now. I will be a little bit fast. So as I said, hopefully having some time to discussion. The quality of waters, and that is now referring to the first of all, the environmental quality or ecological quality is basically a kind of quality that we observe today in comparison to a reference state. So we ask what would be the natural state of a river or a system, a water body, and what is the current one. And you could say the blue high would be basically the reference condition, or that would be the natural condition. And the idea is to just slightly deviate from that. So that is the term of reaching good quality. And the original goal in 2000 was that all waters in the European Union reach good quality. That was by 2015. So that is an important addition. We did not reach that goal, and I think everybody in 2000 agreed that it's impossible to reach that goal, but it's still a try to go in that pathway. Now, interesting perhaps is also a way to support the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. So there is a common implementation strategy. You can imagine that asking 27 countries when it started with less countries, but still a high number of countries that should implement it. So that means a high level of coordination is needed. So here you have the common implementation strategy. The work program is updated every 3 years. So this is the current structure, and you always have the water directors. These are the most important people in each country, usually ministers of water or people working in the ministries of environment. And then you have coordination groups and you have different working groups. These working groups, they develop tools, they develop support, they develop guidance documents that help the member states to implement the Water Framework Directive. And this is something that would be useful to look at. You see here, I will share the presentation and you can click on the link, then you get more information on the common implementation strategy. I will also share the link for the guidance documents. So today we have 37 guidance documents, and they started actually in the first guidance document was published in the year 2000 actually, and following the idea, or the first document doesn't have a number. No, it was because they started just saying, okay, we need to have the support of the member states in how to identify river basin districts. You know, that starts with the topography, that starts with the administrative analysis and so on. So using GIS and how to do that, so that is all described in the first guidance document. Then, as I said, the economic principles should be followed. And you can go now, these are the first 14, and you have almost any issue of water management is addressed in one of these guidance documents. So I think it's quite useful. Now, if you go to guidance documents number 9, using GIS for the WFD, I'm not sure from which year that is, but it's probably 15 years old. So in some cases, I would recommend perhaps to read these guidance documents critically and consider that at the time when they were developed. But it is still an important source of support and information. Now, this looks a little bit complicated, but what I want to show here is basically the different phases. So we are talking in the Water Framework Directive about 6-year phases. And of course, in the beginning of the Water Framework Directive, some issues like determining the districts, analyzing the baseline status, establishing the monitoring programs, and so on were there. But from 2009 on, this 6-year cycle was followed, and we just finished now the cycle until or we are about to finish it, the cycle until 2021, and then the last cycle starts. So that is the 2027 when good status should be reached in all water bodies of the European Union. And then you see there's a monitoring program. Again, the monitoring program helps to do the assessment. The assessment is the foundation to refine, update the program of measures. And measures include all kinds of activities that could relate to infrastructure, changing of policies and guidelines, etc. So this is the basic idea. So I think in one go, you have here all the activities that are related to the Water Framework Directive. Now, looking at the implementation, a key word in the Water Framework Directive is participation. And this is now a slide in German, but I will translate it to English. And this is just an example of one spatial level. And this is now a state in Germany. And who is participating in the implementation of the Water Framework Directive? And you see here, of course, the Environment State Office, the regional administrations, the Ministry of Environment of the state, the agencies, agricultural associations, nature fishery associations, the companies, of course, and utilities, water associations. That is a special thing here in North Westphalia. We have river basin associations, but also industry and commerce are there to participate in the development of the Water Framework Directive. So that is, I would like to highlight as I think a key element of the Water Framework Directive is this issue of the need. No, it is really the obligation to practice participation. And participation here means, of course, mainly involving the relevant institutions in the assessment of water resources and also defining the program of measures. Now, just to give an example of a transboundary basin, here you have the largest river basin in the European Union, which is the Danube Basin. Actually, what you see here is the river in red, and you see it is crossing a large part of Europe, starting in Germany and ending in the Black Sea. So the Danube River Basin actually has 10 countries, and with that, it's the most international river basin in the world. There's no other basin that has so many countries sharing its river basin area. And you can imagine that this is posing a very, let's say, strong challenge to the implementation. It was even stronger because at the time, some of the countries, Moldova still is not member of the European Union, Ukraine is still not member of the European Union, but and Kosovo, Montenegro are not, and so on. But nowadays, Romania is, Hungary is. So in the meantime, the large fraction of these countries is in the European Union, but still not all. So that is posing an interesting additional challenge. But still, the other countries agreed. Also, some of them are seriously preparing to become member of the European Union, and this is why they adopt some of the principles. But they are engaging in the same process of using the Water Framework Directive as a kind of guidance to do the assessment and the other steps that I've shown. So the result is, and this was now in the year 2009, that was the result of the first cycle, that River Basin District Management Plan was developed. There's unfortunately no time to go into more detail here, but the figure below show, and the link is down here. So again, you can go to that website, even though there is no single English-speaking country in the Danube Basin, it is still published in English. So not in Portuguese, because Portugal is not sharing the Danube Basin, but otherwise you would find it, the large part of the information also in the different languages. But this is published in English, and so this is just the roof report. No, you see it. Sorry, there is a little bit of the text is cut here, but it's the roof level part A, and then you have two more levels where you go to the national levels at each country, and then to the subunit level, which are detailed assessment reports and also management reports for the Danube basin. So that is something we have to keep in mind if we talk about integrated water resources management. Then we are talking also about integration over space. I think that is a very important issue. And when we teach IWM, we always start with saying, okay, it is integration over space, of course, over time, integration over sectors and so on. But obviously, you cannot, in one report, refer to all relevant aspects of the whole basin. And for example, here they have decided that they will report on catchments larger than 4,000 square kilometers or lakes with a higher surface of 100 square kilometers, etc. So that's the idea. And recently they also published a very interesting advanced report. So that is not under the framework of the Water Framework Directive, but it's something that I think it's worthwhile reading. So they are calling it the most comprehensive river basin assessment worldwide. I'm not sure if they are using that as a kind of marketing effort, but perhaps at least it is some comprehensive and good example of a survey. They have two publications you see here. One is the scientific report and the other is more for the public. So that is also an interesting way of presenting it. So this is just to mention it. This was published recently, and I encourage you to go to that website. I put the link down here. Now, that was the European Union part, and I think we have to hurry a bit also to talk about Germany. And now there's a lot to talk about Germany, for sure. I'm waiting more for your questions because I cannot really judge what would be more interesting for you to know about water management in Germany. But I will give you some ideas. And so in this slide, we are looking at the multi-level nature of water management, which you find in other countries in a similar way. In Germany, our constitution is emphasizing the principle of subsidiarity. And that is, whatever you can do at the lowest level should be done at the lowest level. So that means there should be no interference, or there's no impact of local water supply, not even from the larger, from a kind of district level, or even from the state, that we have 16 federal states, or not to say from Berlin as a capital, or from the European Union. So that means if you look at the municipal level, whatever is related to water supply is the whole responsibility of the municipality. They have to make sure that the people get water and that the wastewater is treated, that the drainage is working, etc., etc. So that is the most important management level, is the local level. And then you have different other levels, 16 states, the federal level. And here you see, for example, the Federal Water Act. That is our water law. Now, if you read the Federal Water Act, you will see a one-to-one copy of the Water Framework Directive and other things. So that the idea of the Water Framework Directive was, we are creating a framework law. That's the meaning of framework directive. But then it needs to be implemented by the member states. In Germany, it was implemented 17 times because of our constitution. We have to have the consent and the implementation of the 16 states. So the Water Framework Directive was implemented 17 times in Germany, and you find the reference to it in all state laws and in the national law. So that is perhaps showing enough on that. Again, here, what I provide to you is now more to read. So if you click on each link, you will find the text of the Water Framework Directive. You will find the National Water Act. This is in English. Then further down, the state law in this is now the example of our state. We are here in Cologne in North Rhine-Westphalia. It's the largest state with almost 18 million inhabitants, but it has an own water law. So that is again the basic principle. And we could talk about the planning structure in Germany. So this is also implementing this clear idea of connecting the different administrative levels, and this is the Gegenstrom principle, is a kind of interfacing principle that certain need and information goes from the communal level or from the municipal level to other levels, and others is going top down. No? So bottom up and top down principles are united here. Okay, I will not talk about this more because I think it gives you an idea perhaps on the structure. Zooming into where we are, so Cologne has its own water management, it's wide, but around us are kind of hilly areas, sometimes mountains, you may call them, and the watersheds here are managed by watershed associations. So that's a special thing. And these watershed associations, some of them are almost 150 years old. No? So at the end, or not at the end, at the peak of the Industrial Revolution here in this area, when coal mining, machinery, and steel production and all that were as a peak, they realized that waters are polluted. No, this was in the 19th century. And they formed watershed associations to protect water resources. You see this blue one, the Ruhr, they kept it more or less free of wastewater. They put the wastewater to other watersheds like Lippe, Hampshire, and they kept the Ruhr free to be the water supply, let's say, water tower of the region. And accordingly, the watershed management was also quite kind of strict here. There are a lot of reservoirs, etc. And so I think it is, if you think about a legislative implementation of watershed associations, I would guess it's the oldest in the world. And accordingly, there's a lot of experience here with watershed associations. And you see here the size is a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand square kilometers. The population is a couple of 100,000 to, what is the highest here, 2.5 million living in the Erfverband, for example, which is just adjacent to Cologne. So that is something also, I just mentioned it here. I'm not sure what you already know about it, what you want to know about it, but I think it's worth mentioning that I think if it comes to watershed management, you find probably at least the oldest experience. I would not say the best experience, that is according to the topic I think that you are describing. So two more things about Germany, and that was before the European Union started with the Water Framework Directive. We had two main laws that we created in the 1970s, and one is the wastewater regulation. Interesting here is that it is part of the criminal law, no? And that means if you are discharging water that is above certain concentrations, you are committing a crime, and the fines can be very high. So that is a very important aspect here. And so the municipalities and the industries, they are requested to follow the best available techniques. Of course, not the very best ones where you have to pay perhaps millions or billions to implement them, but the best available techniques that are economically reasonable. That is an important addition. And then they define for each sector these limit values, and sometimes they are reflecting the reality on the ground. So for example, if you have a smaller community, this is now section 1, that is sector 1 is the municipality. So therefore, for any other industrial sector, the limit values are determined, and no industry should surpass them. Then they are committing a crime, they have to pay a fine. And in terms of municipalities, as I said, municipalities are responsible to do this. So municipalities are considered as an entity that has the duty not to pollute, and they are controlled by the other levels of government that I mentioned before. So if a municipality pollutes above these limit values, then they have to pay a very, sometimes very high fine. And you see the limit values are different. So that means a smaller community is allowed to pollute more per capita, or in terms of the wastewater they release, than a big community, because a big community can afford better treatment per capita, so to say. So that is So you see different limit values for different sizes of communities. But I will not go into more detail. Sorry for that, to go a little bit fast. The second legislation I want to show is the Water Charges Act. So this is now a different legislation. It's not criminal law, but it's a kind of incentive law. That means the polluter pays principle is organized. That means if you are, of course, you have to fulfill these limit values, but if you treat your wastewater even better, if you invest more in treatment, then you are rewarded for it because you pay less charges. So, and for each unit of pollution, there is a kind of price. So even if you are fulfilling the limit values, you still have to pay because you're polluting the environment. And there's a price tag on each unit. And now, for example, 50 kilograms of COD is 1 unit. This costs 35 euro. Phosphorus, 3 kilograms costs 35 euro, and so on, and others. So that means we are aware that you cannot be a zero polluter. You have to be at least under the limit value, as I mentioned before. But if you do better, then you can still save money because you are paying less for polluting less. Now, there was a certain success to that. Okay, I don't go to the other legislations. If you see, for example, here in the 70s, it was introduced in the 1980s, it was still high, but here you see the pollution coming from different sources of wastewater. And so you see here that there was a significant reduction from the 1980s to the 1990s. Or if you look at the concentration of phosphorus, for example, in the Rhine, due to different legislations and these laws, it was significantly reduced in that time. So that is something which you can call a success, but we also have to admit, and this is now putting Germany into serious problems under the Water Framework Directive, which is now, let's say, this is the highest level of control, is the Water Framework Directive. And you see here in red all the groundwater areas in Germany that are not fulfilling the limit values for groundwater pollution in terms of nitrate. This is the example of nitrate. On the left, you see this blue part of this cake, so to say, is the fraction of water supply in Germany that is coming from groundwater. So it is our most important resource, but at the same time, it is significantly polluted. So why is that? Why is it still polluted even after so many years of legislation, of control, and so on? And there are many answers to it, but the most important one is that we and the Water Framework Directive are not following the principles of integrated water management. And that is in the European sense. You have another area, which is the common agricultural policy, that is determining how lands are managed. And there is not sufficient interaction between these policies. And most of the pollution that you see here in red is actually coming from agriculture. In the north of Germany, it is mainly manure coming from very intensive livestock farming. So that there are still big problems. So we can say that there are successes, but we also have to admit that there's still a long way to go. And before I close, I will just refer to an event that happened 2 days ago. And this is now perhaps the response to it. First of all, at the German level, because the Water Framework Directive will not be revised until 2027. They will continue with this, even though there are many persons criticizing it, or not criticizing it, but asking for a revision. But nevertheless, I think it was a good effort of the German Ministry of Environment, together with other actors, to determine the national water strategy. So far, it's just published in German, but I summarized the key points, the key 10 strategic points of the German national water strategy here. And this is really an attempt to look at water in a much more holistic way. We are we need to create more awareness among all the citizens, but also all the institutions, because awareness is always the most important point. We see here a very important role for us as university. We want to develop the infrastructure Infrastructure investments are for the future, but we perhaps don't know exactly what to expect. So we have to find a way to revise the infrastructure, but also improve it. You want to look at the circular economy as part of water management, or rather the other way around, still limit some of the very new pollutants, micropollutants, but also, as I said, agricultural pollutants, and so on, water sensitive and adapted, climate adapted land and urban planning, further develop the idea of sustainable water management and so on. And last but not least, also strengthen the administration in this integrated effort. And here there was an emphasis that we are doing a lot. We have information systems and so on, but still our knowledge towards the very complex interactions between water availability on one hand, water use on the other hand, impact of climate change on the other hand, the interaction of many sectors, all related to water, is still not sufficient. So we need more knowledge and we need more data. And point 10, this refers perhaps to our seminar today. So this is a way to connect internationally and to join forces with others to solve our problems in an integrated, but also in an cooperative way. So that is, I'm quite happy that this point is here, because again, that's something very important for us. So I try to give you in a short time this overview, and I also hope that you learn something, of course, but also that you may have more questions. I'm very happy to answer them if I can. Thank you very much. And this is a picture of the Rhine, just a bit south of Cologne and Bonn. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lars, for your presentation. Agora vamos passar a palavra para a doutora Rosa Maria.
Now let's pass the word to Professor Rosa Maria Formiga, who has a graduation from the Federal University of Goiás, master and doctorate in science and environmental techniques from the University of Paris in France. Currently, she is a professor from UERJ in Rio de Janeiro and director of water management for the State Institute of Environment in Rio de Janeiro. She has worked in the area of policies, planning, and management of waters, participative management of water basins, savings of water resources, environmental management, territorial planning, integrated management of natural resource risks, and climate change, global climate change, vulnerability, and adaptation. With the word now, Professor Rosa. Good morning, all of you. It's a huge pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ana, on behalf of Gisele and Humberto and Renata Maranhão. And also I would like to thank ProfÁgua on behalf of Professor Jefferson Nascimento and ITT on behalf of Alexandra and Lars. So I would like to, within 30 minutes, give an overview of the integrated management of water resources in Brazil. Well, I will start then with a brief diagnosis on the perspective of water safety. Taking this idea of Sérgio de Moraes, I liked how Sérgio de Moraes presented this diagnosis, so I would like to start talking about the water availability in Brazil. Brazil really does have a lot of water. Brazil is the country that more has drinking water in the world, sweet water in the world. It's an incredible water availability, highly concentrated in the Amazon region. And we also have a semi-arid region where rains much less, and we have much less water availability due to other characteristics also as the soil. We have lots of aquifers, a lot of wealth in underground water, rains a lot, but really we have more water where we have less people. The Brazilian population now is around 213 million people. It is concentrated along the coast, mainly where the water availability is lower. And it's important to notice that besides the natural water availability, Brazil has got a lot of reserved water reserves. You could see here, let me see if I can show you the computer. Well, you could see here in yellow or orange, the water reserves, their reservoirs. In blue, we have the rivers, natural rivers, without any kind of reservation. And to the right, you could see a graph where the Brazilian characteristic, besides having a lot of water reserves, and many are lakes that do not generate energy in northeast and in the semi-arid, and in the other part of the country the reserve is mainly done by the electrical sector. So this map shows us in the orange, the lighter yellow or orange shows us the greater contribution of water reserves in Brazil come from the electrical sector. So now looking at a diagnosis on the perspective of water safety and the 4 dimensions of water safety which were adopted by the National Plan of Water Safety, Water Security. The first dimension is the human dimension, where the providing water to the population is increasingly more complex in this context of demand increase and climate change. And this map shows the catchment points for human water supply in Brazil. As you can see, we have a huge concentration in southeast and along the coast. And we also have a characteristic which is very specific, where 48% of the Brazilian population is depending on integrated systems. And we have part of the population, the significant part of the population, which also lives in regions that depend on the neighboring basins, like the metropolitan region of Rio de Janeiro that drinks water basically from the Paraíba do Sul River basin. And in relation to water access, we have a significant percentage, 95% of the population use services of drinking water that considered to be safe, but this also includes the intermittence of the service and sometimes the quality of the service that was not considered. And the second dimension, called by the National Plan of Water Security as ecosystemic dimension, would be the issue of pollution, the water quality control. And as I won't have much time here, I will just mention the pollution of organic nature. Unfortunately, in Brazil, that's the main source of pollution. In Germany, this has already been overcome in general in Europe, and they are already in a second phase of problem generation and integrated management of water resources, but we still have basic problems to solve. And in terms of sewage, sanitation, around only 63% of the sewage generated is collected, and around 51%, about half, is treated. So you could see again these maps. I love these maps from the ANA reports. They are very interesting and very informative. Where you could see that the more hotter the color, the brighter, darker the color is, more problems of pollutions of domestic origin we would have in Brazil. And we have a greater concentration or a significant concentration in metropolitan areas, and Brazil has several of these areas, like the metropolitan area of Rio de Janeiro, with few water bodies that have a quality which is above 3. So it's out of class. Class 4 isn't. So in relation to the economic dimension, let me just take a look at time. In relation to the economic dimension, we have then several other water usages, consultative and non-consultative, and this is a potential of conflict. The water resource management is conflict management. So to the left only, so you could very quickly see the growth of the water catchment by the different sectors, and also the irrigation sector is here because it's not considered in this scale of the other sectors. And in relation to the removal flow, Brazil follows the world trend. The main user is irrigation and following urban supply. In relation to the other uses, so you can have a better idea of the spatialization and the pressure of the different demands in the territory. To the left, we have the industrial catchment. You can see that we have a greater important concentration to the coast and more to the interior of the southeast and south region, where we have the concentration. And to the right, the irrigated agriculture. This has been advancing a lot, growing a lot in the Midwest, in the Cerrado region, and in the Brazilian savanna due to the livestock, and it's also advancing in the Amazon region. And in relation to the conflict, I liked very much this slide that I borrowed from Sergio. In relation to the potential of irrigation and electric energy, these are the conflicts that are more common. Today, in the technical chamber of the National Water Resource Management, we are going to focus on a conflict between irrigation and energy generation, energy production in the São Marcos Rivers Basin. So this is a potential conflict, I would say, that is the most important for us. In the resilience dimension, we are going to focus in relation to the water risk crisis and the climate change effect. Brazil has experiencing droughts. Those that worked with water resources in Brazil 30 years ago always heard that drought was a problem, always mainly focusing on the semi-arid region of Brazil, which considered Northeast and Minas Gerais. But the recurrent droughts have been impacting sequentially several metropolitan areas like São Paulo in 2014, Rio de Janeiro, Belo Horizonte were threatened to interruption of water supply, but we could solve the problem before reaching the population. Then we had Brasilia, now Curitiba. So we have several cities that before they did not have any problems, and the trigger for this crisis has been a drought, which has been very different from the normality, an extraordinary drought, even though the anthropic factors are the main factor, the vulnerability of the population related to the anthropic factors. But if you already have a vulnerability and you already have this new layer of stress that is also important, then this is a perfect combination for a water crisis. The droughts in Brazil have been affecting the whole region. As you could see in this infographic from UNA report, it is cyclic. It changes place. It starts, it moves, and right now we have a great drought exactly in the Paraná River Basin and floods in Amazon Basin. So the floods and the droughts are cyclic, unfortunately, but frequent and more recurrent. The Paraíba do Sul River Basin, that's the basin that I work the most with. Since the water crisis of 2014, the average contribution of water has been systematically below the average calculated since the 30s. So there is a drier period since after 2014. In relation to floods, we have recurrent floods as well. Floods are problems, or inundation and floods are problems, recurrent problems in all urban areas in Brazil, and we have greater floods like this one now in the Amazon region. So very quickly, I will talk about the models of water integrated management of water resources introduced by the law of waters in Brazil. So Brazil has a characteristic of having the double domain of waters. So we have federal waters and state waters. And due to this, we have two levels of management systems, two levels of reforms. So to create a system, management system of water resources, we must have legislations from federal institutions and legislations from state institutions. And besides that, I will show you more ahead, we also created other institutions at water basin level. This map is just to show you that Brazil has the curiosity or the specificity of having these two levels. It's a question that I would like to make to Lars as well. Germany is a federation which is more consolidated than the Brazilian Federation, but I believe there isn't this problem of double domain or two levels of domain as we have here in Brazil. And the rhythm of approval of the law of waters in Brazil was very interesting because it didn't start by the federal law, it started by the state of São Paulo, where everything started. And this was expanded throughout the country. And in 1967, we have the law of waters until the whole country, all the units of the federation had their laws in 2007. The objective of those laws of waters at national and state levels, federal and state levels, we could summarize as water security, ensure water in quantity and quality to the current and future generations and to the different uses, with rational use and the risk management of extreme events. I would highlight here floods and droughts. It's a very important difference compared to the European directive, where the main objective would be the ecological well-being of the water bodies. So they have a more ecosystemic approach, which is much stronger and which is not the main explicit objective of our legislation. And in relation to the fundamentals and principles, I will not have time to go deep into details, but what I could highlight here is that all those principles and fundamentals and all of those letters of Dublin and all of the different documents of international organisms, institutions that started to defend the integrated management of water resources are present in our legislation. And the new thing is to reinforce the multiple use of water, introduce the basin and the community of planning and management. The participative management is very strong now, and the integrated management as well, decentralized. So it would be possible to create basin level institutions, and maybe the main difference between our practices would be the introduction of water as an economic value translated by the charge for the water use. The laws introduced 5 instruments, but these management instruments are not only these. Some states inserted formally and some other instruments as well. I see that everything done and everything that we have to take care and to be able to help us reach our objectives of the laws and the systems, the management systems, in my opinion, they would be instruments. So I consider the legal framework, the everything would be management instruments. In relation to the political and institutional organization, I could summarize with a very popular saying. We need to do the haircut and the complete shave, a full service. So the idea of the new management system would be, besides having the institutions as ANA that was created after the approval of the laws of waters, and this happened also in several other states that are connected to a political body, a ministry, or a state policy. But the greatest new aspect would be the introduction of committees and basic committees based on the experience from France. And I will mention more ahead about this inspiration. It happens that due to this double domain and the adoption of the community water basement, we created then 2 situations in Brazil that have different levels of complexity. In those basins, I'm sorry, in the basins where we have only state waters, the management is more simple. And in the basins where we have a double domain, as Paraíba do Sul River Basin, São Francisco Basin, the management is highly complex. But now I will talk about the overview of the practices. One thing is the proposal of the legislation, and something else is what we are doing in practice. I mentioned quickly, basically we had no steering committees in Brazil besides São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So it was necessary to create these steering committees. I would like to highlight the one from the state of Ceará, Congé. And the state of Ceará has a special highlight here because it was differentiated with this model of French inspiration, highly focused on this tripod, committee, agency, and charging plan. And it has this characteristic of centralizing the charging and also being the manager of the water resource structure. But I consider COGET as the state steering committee, which is the most prepared in the Brazilian Federation. We also have other ones that are very important, but Ceará State really is a special case. It's important also to notice that we could say that the management of waters in Brazil has before and after ANA agency, because the National Agency of Waters made a huge difference. First, because it created this capacity, technical capability, and institutional capability that did not exist before at a federal level. We have a directory that has a term, a mandate, so that's good. It protects a little bit more the decisions of the institution, and that's what we really want. And we want it to continue it this way. And ANA has the greatest technical density, the greatest technical capability of the country. Not in numbers necessarily, but the ANA public exam can select people that are highly capacitated and trained, besides those that are contracted and outsourced. And besides that, ANA, besides the salary being paid by the federal budget, it also counts with budget for the water, the charging the water use, and in 2016 was 420 million. We had a problem of contingency in the beginning, and I hope that it hasn't returned. And in the new attributions that ANA has received, we can highlight here, to be the regulator of the regulators in the area of basic sanitation. In relation to the states, currently we can say that we have one mosaic. We have all kinds, all types. We have a state as Ceará, which has a very strong steering committee. We have states that are advanced, like Minas Gerais, São Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro states, that already have a more robust directory of waters. It was a little bit dehydrated, but we still have a staff, an internal team that is highly dedicated to it. Some states created the steering committee, but they did not advance much, and lots of states still do not have a steering committee for the indirect administration. So they would be secretariats or directories of a secretariat. And due to this problem, then we have two levels where we have ANA implementing this management in interstate basins, and the steering committees or whoever is responsible for managing those waters at a state level will implement their system, state system. And this was very good because we could speed up the process, but in the end we created the problems that I will mention in my final comments and remarks. Well, very quickly, just so you can have an idea, we have a huge number of basin committees. The basin committees in Brazil are collegiate, participative, gathering representatives of the public sector, user sector, so civil society, and attributions that are extremely important for the management of water resources. And I would highlight here the first instance of conflicts, approving the basin plan, approving the values and the criteria for charging for the water use, and the adjustments of the water bodies. I will stop here, but they are very important attributions. And of this total, and out of this huge number of committees, only 50% of the committees would have a technical operational body through a basin agency or something similar. So that is an indicator of limitation of actions, because a basin committee without the technical and operational support minimum, and it must be robust, they will not be able to achieve their goals. And the charging for water use is an instrument that we had a lot of hope on, that it could really make a difference in the management of water resources, but I consider that the charge for water resources is still very humble, very timid in relation to its true capacity. Adding up the charging, we have less than 500 million reais until December of 2018, according to the report from ANA. And Ceará state, once again, is differentiated because only Ceará in 2018 gathered 116 million, and 1 more billion reais accumulated since the beginning of the charge. And besides talking about the charging for the electrical service sector, which allows ANA to have these programs and to comply with their roles. Now, in relation to the levels of reimbursement, that was more severe, and it has been improved in the recently, but it's still a bottleneck. It's a problem to give a greater significance to the charging process. And of course, the hope that we had that the resources of charging for the water use could be leveraged significantly in the implementation of the basin plans, we should focus more on this work. Well, basically, that's it. In these two maps, you could see where we have the federal charges implemented by ANA and the interstate committees. And to the right, we could see the state charging for the water use. And you could say that it's very limited in the territory. Plans. Well, today we have a very good experience in the elaboration of plans. More than 228 plans were carried out in state basins and 12 plans in interstate basins. And that means that most of the committees have plans. But once again, we have to talk about the origin problem that has a low level of implementation. And the plans in Brazil, different from the French plans, and I believe that in Germany also, they are non-binding plans. So they are not mandatory for that institution, which is responsible for a specific action to implement. It would be very interesting to Lars talk about a little bit about this, maybe, if possible. Lots of criticism could be were made by the planning process, but we had significant evolutions in this learning of diagnosis that are more objective and a more robust signaling and more pragmatic action plans. You could see that most of the Brazilian territory would have a plan. Approvals really are, well, what we could say is that we came from a world where we had a management per user based on the users because we had no control for the water use. So a good thing of the system is that currently we know most of our users, the main users, where they are, how they use their water, and most of them are regular users. So this infograph, I love this infograph because you could see the size of the circle, which is the amount of approvals issued. And here we have the amount of approvals being 250,000. And on this other axis, we would have the timeline. And the mark per state, you could see here, was the year, the starting year for issuing these approvals. São Paulo was the first, and ANA really has a very important involvement in this. And you could see the specialization of the approvals being offered by this map. Well, what we could say is that approvals in practice was seen to be instruments that works really well where there is water, restrictions where we have water limitations and shortage, and that's why it was made up and created the allocation of allocated water, but it has the same principle. A very important point as well, which I consider to be a significant advance in this organization of the management in Brazil, is the crisis management. So ANA has the situation room, the crisis room, and today we have the crisis room in the States as well. Besides the drought monitor, my image here is late. It's not the Northeast anymore, but as I'm from the Northeast, I have to show it. But we have a great part of the country, including Rio de Janeiro state. And ANA, together with the states and the committees, we have been having a very significant involvement in the management of crisis. I myself was part of the Paraíba do Sul River crisis, which was a very interesting and a very wealthy collective effort. Now, towards the reflection, final reflection. I don't know how many minutes I have left. I believe 7 minutes. My final reflections are a lot of reflections. But what I would like to say to conclude is, if we look to the management of water resources in Brazil 30 years ago and now, the difference is brutal. It's a huge difference. We advanced a lot. We were able to improve a lot. It's impressive in terms of the new management practices, social mobilization, and basic committees, associations, councils, and user associations, and the institutional strengthening in lots of states, and mainly in a federal level, because it didn't exist. It was only a secretariat of the mine and energy ministry, and afterwards the environmental ministry. And in terms of achievements, I would say that we would have the technical basis of management. When I was in my doctoring course, more than 20 years ago, it was very difficult to access data and information. This data were fragmented, they were not consolidated. So today we have databases, not only technical databases for more robust management, but also this data that have been worked and treated more and has become information, better information, producing knowledge for the service of a decision-making process. So at this point, we have to give a special highlight to ANA, and some states are starting to do this as well. ANA has done a lot of work in this area of aspect consolidation of technical base or technical foundation, and also the transparency, and to create mechanisms as the situational report, which would be able to deliver information. And when I saw that Lars was talking about the part of information needs to advance a lot in Germany, I was thinking, oh my God, we still have a long way to go here. And the results are much more positive because now we know much better about the problems and the management priorities. And I would say that the water crisis from 2014 to now brought a more strategic view to our management. And during some time, I would say that it was more focused on it was more process based, about approvals, about the plans, and about the implementation of the water charge. And the concept of water security, that the National Plan of Water Security and its state level and basin level have also brought more purpose to this management. And I like this because this resembles us to the finalistic results. And obviously the capacity of developed for the management of water crisis is considerable, and it must be more, even more. Uh, Remember about the problems in Rio Paraná Basin rivers and the floods that we have in Amazon River. I already mentioned this here, that in terms of knowledge of water and its use and its strategic guidance, the results are completely impressive. We could see the before and after, and all of this is accessible through the sites that we have on our website. We have the National System of Water Resource Management, which is extremely interesting. And I also would like to say that going to more finalistic results, we could see that these outcomes are more modest. We advanced hugely in terms of management foundation and process, but the results are still very modest in terms of protection and recovery of water resources. But also we have a lot of local and regional experiences going on and that are very significant, such as the negotiated allocation of water in Ceará, and ANA has already implemented in several parts, as you could see here in this map to the right. And the PCJ basin has a very interesting experience for the recovery of water quality in Rio de Janeiro as well. The Basin Committee was ahead of the recovery of the Araruama Lagoon or lake, the management of the water crisis in Paraíba do Sul River Basin, and also the initiatives to bring the green agenda to the blue agenda, which is now in payment for the environmental services and solutions based on nature-based solutions, and the protection of the watershed. It's still in pilot scale, but they are very promising and important as a complement for the needed gray water infrastructure that we need. Challenges in my last few minutes. Well, first, I believe that creating so many basin committees without the guarantee of operational and technical support is a problem. It created a problem. And this happened because, different from ANA, which learned very quickly with the Paraíba do Sul case, we had to go to the interstate basin with a package for the regulation of uses, plans, charging, agency, and the committee would be part of this package. And in the States, this did not happen. So this was creating a series of committees that are now not possible to achieve their attribution. As I mentioned, a lot of trust in this charging, and there was no political will from lots of decision makers to make this charging process really happen. The basin plans were extremely important to know more about the plans and to give a direction to us, but we need to make a lot of efforts so it could be more implemented or better implemented. The information systems, well, had a lot of advancement at ANA in a federal level, but we do not observe the same thing in most of the states. The adjustment is very difficult, the application, and we notice that there is a very low integration among the management instruments. Water allocation. Well, at the same time, it was the greatest novelty besides the approval that allowed us to know better the water uses and the users. The water allocation, the negotiated allocation really brought to us lots of significant advances for the water resource management, but I believe that we need to advance much more in different aspects of allocation. And there's a very interesting report from OECD that is focusing on this topic, and I would like to register here as a researcher my apprehension, my concern and fears in relation to the bill, in relation to water markets. Myself, as a researcher in the country, I have a lot of concerns. I believe we are not prepared for that. The major challenges of governance, I'd like to mention now 3 points that I believe the most core aspects so we could advance in the full implementation of an integrated management of water resources. First, this model inspired by São Paulo, which was inspired by France. In my opinion, it's not adequate for the Amazon nor to the semi-arid in Brazil. I consider the Ukrainian, the model implemented by Ceará as a very successful experience for the Brazilian semi-arid. And in the Amazon region, we have to think about this model. We need a very strong environmental relation, but I believe that we need to tackle this, and we have different ways of participative management. I don't think that we should be creating committees, agencies, or implementing charges for the Amazon region. And here, the main problem that I consider today for the management in Brazil would be this complexity of the interstate water basins management. This was discussed when it was a bill. We had lots of polemics raised, and which was the last rapporteur, removed this so the law could be approved. So I believe that while we still do not have rules established for harmonizing and managing, real integrated managing between the federal and state waters, we are not going to advance much more in management. And as these rules do not exist, we also have a proposal for dialogues, which was a study from the World Bank, the request of ANA and the Ministry of Environment, which proposes a complementary law to clarify what we should do in different circumstances when we do not have a harmonization or where we have conflicts in these levels. I was there, present in the conflict of São Paulo in terms of the water transfer, but while we still do not have these rules, we only have one solution, which would be to sit down, negotiate, and agree upon. And this is difficult, and ANA's role is crucial here. And with the plan of Paraíba do Sul River, we have a focus on this agreement process. I know I'm out of time already. I'm trying to run to conclude. And I do not believe in the advanced water resource manager without strong managers. So that is a problem, an issue at a state level in Brazil. That is a real problem, severe problem that we need to tackle, we need to face. I know that ANA has Gestão and several other programs that will go in this direction, but I understand that we really need to ensure that the state should be prepared and properly trained to take over these roles in a more complete way. In relation to ANA agency, I would like to register here, obviously, that ANA has a huge challenge of coordinating the systems and to enhance the systems, but I would like also to say that, well, about the hope and the fear of the water resource community in relation to their new roles in sanitation, basic sanitation. And we hope that because Anna is responsible for the two agendas now, Anna finally can integrate this rationale of basic management to the sanitation. This has never done before, basically, and mainly we want this to be an additional competence of the agency, and this should not happen because of the water resource advances that we achieved up to now. So the SDGs, I would say that the last report from Anna assessed that Anna monitors SDG 6 in Brazil. There is a very interesting report about it. Every year there's an update to this report and these metrics in the report that was and the integrated management of water resources in Brazil was assessed from 0 to 100, and the average was 6.3, which is very reasonable, and I agree with this opinion. And above all, we have 500 different pressures of climate change, deforestation, and etc. So that's it for now. We have to continue enhancing and improving and advancing, and we have a half glass, full glass, and a half empty glass. We cannot focus only on the half empty glass. As you can see, even Germany, even European Union has the half empty glass, and the other half full glass, or the 60% of the full glass, would be representing then extraordinary advances, but even though they're not enough to tackle the magnitude and the complexity of the water resource problems. And I stop here. I apologize for the time and the speed. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rosa, for your presentation. Well, right now, I will start then our Q&A session for our speakers, but both speakers can also share their opinion about the same question if they would like. So I would like to start with Dr. Lars.
Some ones. We believe that Germany has a very dense groundwater monitoring network. I ask, is this the monitor network integrated with border countries?
Thank you very much. So that's a very good question. The monitoring network is dense. That is true. There is, let's say, monitoring of groundwater bodies. The information is shared, but integrated in a way that there is a joint programming of the monitoring is not happening actually.
How does Germany deal with disasters management in its integrated water resource management, for example, such as those occurred in Mariana and Brumadinho cities in Brazil, or the disasters of Mer and Borsa in Romania?
Sorry, could you repeat?
We have many disasters here in Brazil, in cities, and these disasters is similar with disaster in Mer, in Borsa, in Romania. The question is, how does Germany deal with the disasters management in its integrated water resource management?
Actually, so far you're talking about different disasters, no? So flood risk is one thing that is quite well addressed, I think. That is flash floods on one hand, but riverine floods on the other hand. Here we also find a high level of international cooperation, also at different governance levels. Drought is an issue that is coming up now. In the water strategy that I mentioned, it is a particular issue. For the first time in the last 5 years, we had several years that were particularly dry. So Germany is now preparing also for drought risk management, but it's something new in Germany. And the other one is, of course, on the risk of pollution. So this is the example perhaps that you have pointed to. There are very advanced plans to monitor any pollution coming from industry and also to have the right reactions to it. So the monitoring systems are crucial here again. But of course, you can never be 100% sure, and there are examples where disasters happen, and that is, I think, one example where we still need to prepare better and to also have a exchange of different sectors in terms of the information you need to to understand the risk involved for water resources. But there's a national authority for disaster prevention that is perhaps not sufficiently connected to the water sector yet, but it's I think still doing relevant jobs.
Okay. How does the education system work in the integrated water resource management system in Germany?
Yeah, perhaps I mentioned in the beginning that I think it is not sufficiently addressed in the classical education. You still have the majority of programs being rather sector oriented. So you have the civil engineers are teaching water from their perspective, the agricultural engineers from another perspective. So I would say that master programs that we offer in integrated water resource management are still too few. And I think there is a need to have a much more, perhaps a different view on education in general. What we try to do is to use the actual challenges on the ground in terms of project-based management as a uniting factor to bring students together, but also bringing the academia together with practice. I think these kind of interfaces are important to establish in the education system. So there are good examples, I would say, but still the sector view is dominating.
Ok. Thanks, Lars. Na sequência, as perguntas
Right
serão...
afterwards, the questions will be for Dr. Rosa, but Lars, you can also answer. Feel free to answer those questions. Feel free if you would like. So, Rosa, I would like to ask if there are possible alternatives for leveraging the charge for water use in Brazil. Yes, of course. I believe that the potential of water charge is much larger than what we charge now in relation to where the water charge has been implemented. It can be more significant, and in the previous years, we had reasonable increases because we had a long time without increasing the tariff, and also in other basins. But now the charge is where we test the political will. It's where we test if the water is in the political agenda or not. So what has been happening is that lots of times some states love creating committees. They love eventually having a basin plan, but when they have to charge, well, they have a lot of difficulties and they cannot overcome the difficulties. So I would say that we need a lot of mobilization and we need a more demonstrational effect. There are some criticism to the charging process, saying that we need to be more efficient for using the resources. That's true, and that's improving. But I understand that we need to defend better what the charge for the water use is for, and exemplify and demonstrate the use of this charge process. We have some study projects that propose an integration between the basin plan and the charging plan to integrate the two-way route. So then the users, when defining the charging, could be seeing what they are being charged for, where the money would go to, and what is this money going to be used for. So I believe that we're just starting with the charge for the water use, but an important comment is that we have lots of basins in Brazil that have no capacities to charge, and we have to think in other possibilities. Lots of basins in Brazil, the charging process would be ridiculous, minimum. So it's not something universal for the whole country. That's my opinion. I believe the next question is also related to part of your answer now. We have other alternatives for investments for the management of water resources. We must have them, because even in a scenario that is extremely optimistic for charging for water use, more robust charging with much more significance, this value, this amount, it never will be enough. It never will be enough, I would say, to cover, to approach, or to implement great part of the actions foreseen in the basin plans. Not even in France they could do it. So obviously we need other resources. And where are they coming from? Well, we have the financial compensation that some states destine to the water resource area, like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais states as well. And mainly, we also need other sectors to invest. It will not be the water resource areas that will be able to fund the sanitation sector. The sanitation sector must be funded by tariffs. It must be funded by lost fund finance and public resources. And the charging process can also help, but it's a more strategic part. The committees from Rio de Janeiro decided to invest in the municipal plans for basic sanitation and also in projects. So we need to have other sources as well, because if the other sources do not come, they don't exist, simply we will not be able to achieve the water security. So all over the world, it's like this. The charging process must be a leverage. It must fund the management and the strategic actions of demonstrational effect, and must be a trigger or a lever so we could have new funding. And for that, we only have one possibility: mobilization, sensibilization, and agreements. No other way out. Rosa, the question is, unfortunately, in Brazil, we lack management and planning in the expansion of cities, or in the growth of cities. And considering these direct impacts on the water resources, on erosion, landslides, and etc. Well, that's one of those most severe problems that we have, because in truth, we are making a lot of effort in risk management, for example, in floods, while at the same time, as Brazil is still growing, the population will only be stable around 2040. The cities are still growing, and the risk areas are still being occupied. So what I think it's important to highlight is that it's not enough to manage the installed risk. We must somehow interact and act. It's not our role, but we must, or we could have an action, a space to act. Once again, I base on my experience, where the steering committee made the mapping of areas in relation to floods, and they looked for ways so these susceptible areas could be incorporated to the territorial planning, not to be occupied. But then we have the social issue, the social aspect. Nobody goes to the area risks because they want. So it's a very difficult situation to be solved, because it involves social and economical issues of inequity in Brazil, which is absurd, the social gap. So this is a problem that we have, that we must work on preventing, managing the risks, and also deforestation. We make a lot of efforts to implement the forests and the strategic areas.
Sim, não, o barulho não era aqui na minha casa. Tá.
Sorry, the interference was not in my house. Sorry. So we make a huge effort to have forests in strategic areas for the protection of the water springs, but the deforestation has increased in Brazil as a whole. In the Atlantic forest, in the savannas, in the Amazon is out of control. So we cannot only want to dry the ice or solve the problem. We need a greater strategic view as well. So the water resource area must be better integrated to the other policies, I would say. Okay.
To ask for Lars. Lars, how does the German deal with expansion of cities and the impacts on water resource?
How do we deal with the impact of cities on water?
Yes, the expansion.
Expansion, yeah. Well, we are not, let's say the population in Germany is not expanding so much. No, we had a very slight population growth. So we are not, the expansion of cities is not the main topic in Germany. No, there are even some cities that are significantly shrinking. And this is causing problems, because if you have less water in the systems, then the original design does not suit anymore. So there are different problems perhaps than the expansion of cities. But in general, water management in urban areas is a big issue, and there we realize that there's a need to improvement, beyond water supply and sanitation, to develop more towards a water-sensitive urban design, which is it's a different view, again, following the principle of integrated water management now in urban areas.
Okay.
Posso complementar essa resposta? Eu queria complementar para o caso brasileiro e dizer...
I would like to complement in relation to the Brazilian case, saying that one of the greater difficulties that we have currently in the water resource management in Brazil is the lack of the low participation of the municipal levels. And the manager of the territory is the municipality, besides the protected areas. So this is a gap, or this is an insufficient part of participation that has a huge impact on the other end. So to do anything in relation to what Lars has said, we need to have an active and proactive municipality.
Alô?
Yes? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Tá tudo congelado para mim.
Everything froze for me. All the videos are frozen, she says.
Hmm.
Poleto lost connection. Yeah, Poleto lost connection. So if you could look at the questions in the chat and make your final remarks and considerations, please. Okay. And then you can pass the word back to Lars. So we have lots of answers. We are not going to have enough time. How many questions can we answer? The idea would be to close at 1 p.m. So if you could maybe make a summary in 5 minutes. Okay. So I will then take the advantage. I see that we don't have lots of questions to Lars. I would like to make a question to Lars. Lars, can you hear me?
Yes.
Lars, eu gostaria que você...
Lars, I would like you to tell us a little bit about the matter of the German Federation and this relationship with the water resource management. How is the definition of responsibilities and attributions in water resource management between the federal government, the state government, and the municipalities? Because I know they're very active.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the German constitution is emphasizing the principle that you are going from the local to the federal level, and whatever can be done at the local level should be done there. So that is a very important principle. So tasks that need, let's say, further involvement from other levels are dealt with on these levels. But for example, we don't have really a German water authority like ANA, because if it comes to water, most of the issues are at the local level or at the regional level. And of course, there are exceptions, and this is if you think about the rivers crossing more than one state, then the monitoring and the responsibilities are there, but not in terms of implementation. That is always shifted to the local or regional level. The same is, of course, true for using waters as waterways. So we have a federal agency for navigation and waterway management. So that these are examples where the federal level is important. And of course, then on top of that comes the European level. But the European Water Framework Directive, as I explained, is rather to control if the member states are implementing the goals and the proposed measures and so on, so that it's not about implementing it as such.
Acho que o professor Poleto voltou, né?
I believe Professor Boleto is back. Oh yes, Rosa, I have another question for you. How do we integrate in platforms the consolidation of the information about the practices of the basin plans and the protection and recovery of waters? Well, in practice, few basin plans are systematically monitored today. currently, and that is something that, well, one of the points that have advanced the most currently. Anna created an operational manual called MOP, to advance on those aspects, but I believe that we still have a huge space of efforts to be made. So we could be monitoring, and consequently, we're able to enhance the process of planning water resources, because the planning process is continuous and cyclical, but the plan is a piece that needs to be monitored. And also we have masters of ProfÁgua working on this topic right now, with the monitoring of basin plans, and also with the basin plans in interstate basins. And I can also answer Professor Fred, that's right. I believe we must have an integration committee in the agreements, impactuation, and a collective action agreed with the state committees. So this happened in Paraíba do Sul in relation to the planning process. Thank you so much, Rosa. Let's now start closing due to the time. And in case your question has not been answered, our organization team will be sending the questions in the chat, and we shared the email, so you could send your questions to the speakers, to these emails on the chat, so they could answer them afterwards. And before closing, the participants that they were not able to follow some of the content will be able to watch afterwards on the YouTube channel, Anna's YouTube channels. And the second webinar, June 17th, will be from 11 to 12:30. The topics discussed will be the experiences of Costa Rica, Colombia, and the integrated management of water resources, strategies of both countries for achieving SDG 6. In the first half of the webinar, a representative from the University of Costa Rica will talk about the Costa Rican case. And Sergio Salazar from the National University of Colombia will talk about the Colombian experience. The certificate of participation will be issued after the closing of the cycle in a single certificate for the cycles. I would like now to thank once again for everyone's presence and participation and the availability of our speakers. Thank you so much, Anna, for preparing such an important event. Thank you so much for the coordination, for organizing such events. And once again, thank you all for all the speakers and everyone's contribution. So now we close this webinar. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Contact me, send me some emails for the questions that haven't been answered yet. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much, ITT. Thank you so much, ProfÁgua.
Aleluia.
A gente pode conversar agora?
Pode.
Tem certeza que estamos só nós agora?
Não sei. Não sei.
Ai, ai.
Rosa.
Thank you very much.
Should go to meet us.
Huh?
In the other, you should meet us in the other link right now
Opa.
for 1 minute.
Tá gravando de novo.
Which link?